In my presentation, I will approach the conference theme from one specific perspective, the projectification of science. My argument in this presentation is that the project format has become a standard way to organize research activities in the current academic context. And this kind of projectification is closely interrelated with power, acceleration, and metrics in academic life. So first, something about the project format. Several authors have emphasized that the project format has been a common organizational response to the rapidly changing and increasingly complex societal conditions we are currently living in. So this format offers a temporal, fixed-term, fast, and flexible mode of achieving specific one-off goals without any promises of continuity, stability, or commitment. This fits well together with the constantly changing and suddenly appearing needs of organizations. Some authors even speak about the projectification of the whole society, so that project-related principles, techniques, procedures, and temporalities penetrate into all aspects of life, including our private lives and social relationships, and also our sense of ourselves. So all we have is projects everywhere. Well, my starting point now is that knowledge production in academia is a good example of the projectification thesis. The model of a lonely scholar who is dedicated for a lifetime to advance one's own research interests along teaching duties in peace and in quiet has become increasingly uncommon, even perhaps a relic. And this applies to all disciplinary fields, also humanities and social sciences, in which this kind of individual working style has been dominant. Currently, research is conducted in teams or in collaboration between different teams in consortium. And it's organized as fixed-term projects on external competitive funding from various national and international sources. Thus, academic research is project-based research. There are, of course, many reasons behind this kind of development. And I think they are mostly linked with the changing relationship between science and society. In the current knowledge-intensive economy, higher education policy and science policy in most Western countries perceive universities increasingly as nodes in the national innovation system. And accordingly, scientific knowledge is a key element of economic growth and competitiveness of firms, regions, nations, EU in the global markets. In consequence, the societal role of academic research has become stronger and more central than before, but only from this kind of utilitarian and economic angle. Academic research is seen as a key player in society, but basically only so far as it has clear economic and societal impacts. This development has, of course, different forms in different national contexts. In Finland, where I come from, this trend is prominent. The Finnish system has been firmly rooted in the Nordic welfare state doctrine, but over the recent years, let's say 10, 15 years, it has turned increasingly, and I would say very rapidly, market-oriented. For instance, we have a new university law, we have a new university's funding model, new salary model for academic staff, all of which are based on performance assessment and competition. And also the Finnish science policy involves an increasing pressure to produce direct societal and economic impact of academic research. And one illustrative example is the establishment of a special strategic research council 2 years ago in Finland. This council belongs to the Academy of Finland, which is the most important funding body for basic research. Now, academics' profile has been expanded to include so-called solution-focused research. The Strategic Research Council finances large, interdisciplinary and interinstitutional consortia for conducting program-based research aimed at finding solutions to the major challenges facing Finnish society. And these themes and major challenges are decided by the Finnish government. This is totally new from our scientific community. Academy of Finland has been like a holy and sacred place dedicated to basic research, academic autonomy and academic freedom, and now it's seen as polluted from outside. So, well, this is only one tiny Finnish example, but I think it speaks of a more general transformation in science-society contract. And in the literature, it has been conceptualized in several ways. I just want to briefly mention two of them. I know you all are very familiar with these concepts. But first, the mode discussion by Gibbons and his co-authors, which claims that curiosity-driven, disciplinary-based mode 1 type of research has given way to externally funded, transdisciplinary, problem-oriented mode 2 type of research, which is conducted in the context of application and evaluated by economic and societal utility. Another influential concept has been academic capitalism by Slaughter and Leslie, and it refers to universities' efforts to attract external funding, both direct profit-seeking activities and market-like activities, where academics, departments, universities compete for external money, but without the intention to make profit. Because the state funding has been diminishing for universities in many countries, academic capitalism and continuous search for revenue, money, has become a sort of necessity for all levels of higher education, including individual academics. Well, both modes debate and the theory of academic capitalism have created lively discussion, also very critical discussion. I won't go into them here, but I think hardly nobody denies that there has been some changes in this science-society contract. And I think it can partly explain why the project format has become such a standard, self-evident, taken for granted way to organize activities in all fields in academia. The project format that is temporal, fast, flexible, is a perfect match with the needs to conduct solution-focused research on competitive external funding. Against this background, I will now move on to the question of time. My argument is that the project format is not only a neutral or technical tool for organizing activities, but it is embedded in a special kind of understanding of time, which in turn has implications for academic life. And I call this kind of time project time. And in order to clarify and specify what I mean by project time, I will distinguish it from process time. So project time refers to the inherent internal temporality of the project format, whereas process time refers to the temporality in the internal logic of research activity. And I need to emphasize now that both of these times are pure ideal types, trying to capture some of the key elements and dimensions of the temporal logic involved. So they do not have any direct empirical counterparts. They are constructions. Actual research is something else, and I will come to that later on. So, I will characterize and compare the key features of these both times shortly. First, project time is fixed term, and it has specific beginning and ending. It starts and ends at given dates, and there used to be milestones in between. And they are determined already in the project application and contract. Thus, the project has an internal clock which dictates how long research can take, what stages there are, and what results need to be gained by certain dates. So project time has a fixed, preset temporal boundaries which separate one project from another and make it an entity of its own with a logo, an acronym, and web pages. Process time instead has no strict temporal limits. Its boundaries are unclear, so that it's not easy to say when research begins and when it ends. It is an ongoing creative process as ideas keep evolving and thoughts ripening, irrespective of preset schedules. Second, project time is linear, cumulative, and progressive. Research proceeds towards the goal steadily. Each step is based on earlier findings, and often these steps need to be reported for assessment and control. In this way, the temporal arrow points always forwards, and the results are produced in a cumulative chain. Process time, in contrast, is non-linear. It entails periods of standstill, deceleration, acceleration. There may be routine phases when nothing much happens. Then there may be setbacks when you need to go backwards. And there may be phases when research makes rapid progress. It's very fast. So while project time is one-dimensional, always heading forwards, process time moves in various directions on neither regular nor predictable basis. Third, project time is invariant and independent of the context. It is based on dates, timings, durations, sequences, which can be quantified, measured, evaluated by the clock and calendar, without taking into account particular work situations. All time is perceived as equal. For project time, it's irrelevant what specific work is being done in what specific circumstances. Process time, in turn, is embedded in the current work situation, and therefore it allows variation when there are changes in the circumstances. The context matters. It is not defined only in quantifiable abstract terms by the clock, but involves qualitative differences. Time is experienced differently depending on what phase of the work is in question. For instance, one day means quite a different thing when the deadline is the next day, or when the deadline is waiting, let's say, 2 weeks or 1 month or 1 year ahead. So fourth, project time is predictable so that the end is known in the beginning. Already in the proposal, it's necessary to articulate what results will be and what results will be and what scientific and societal impact they will have. This means that the future is included in the present, and it can be anticipated and predicted on the present knowledge, which in turn is based on past results. So it's embedded in quite mechanistic causality. This is reverse in process time. It is unpredictable. The future remains open potential, involving a space for emergence. Something totally new and unexpected may appear. From the angle of process time, it would be totally irrational to define the results before the results is actually conducted. Lastly, project time is rooted in fast time. Research is tightly organized according to fixed timetables, and the aim is to achieve the goals in a most cost-efficient ways. Also, because the competition for funding is hard, there is a tendency to promise to do a lot in the applications, which fosters fast time, speeding up time pressure. Fast time is also linked with constant awareness of the time available for the end of each phase of the project. Process time, by contrast, entails timeless time, in which academics are able to immerse in work in a cognitively and emotionally committed way and transcendent constant time awareness. The tempo and rhythm of work is not defined by the schedule, but by the task at hand. It takes as much time that is needed. This kind of immersion in timeless time entails enjoyable flow experiences, but it's not necessarily slow time, as Philip Vostal has reminded in his articles, but it may include heated and hectic moments of discovery and inspiration. The crucial thing is whether hectic working is externally or internally imposed. So, project time and process time represent conflicting temporal regimes. Once more, I need to stress that they are ideal, typical constructions which cannot be traced in actual research practices. Yet this kind of inherent tension or even contradiction between the two temporalities is important for better understanding the current features of academic life. On the one hand, we have linear, decontextualized, predictable, scheduled time. On the other hand, multidirectional, context-dependent, emergent, and timeless time. The core issue is that due to the dominance of the project format in academic research activities, project time becomes the dominant temporal mode and frame for research. Next, I would like to elaborate a bit further the nature of project time from another angle. I think Barbara Adams' theorizing on clock time is of great help here and offers valuable insight. Clock time means the taken for granted and common sense thinking of what time is. Time is what clocks tell us. Clock time seems to be natural, but actually it is quite a special kind of social construction. Adam emphasizes that clock time is standard, abstract, quantified, measurable time, and it can be analyzed by forces, that is, commodification, control, compression, and colonization of time. And I would like to propose that project time presents clock time par excellence, and that accordingly Adam's 4 C's apply to project time extremely well. By so doing, they unveil and make visible some of the underlying and hidden assumptions of project time. So first, commodification of time. It refers to the exchange of research time for money. Academics sell their work time, and the funding bodies and agencies buy it. And this transaction is made with the help of project time. In this way, project time is a commodity in research markets. The second C is control. Project time is controlled in order to use it in a maximally efficient way without wasting time. So academics are accountable to the funding bodies and also often to the university management for their use of time, for instance by time management and performance assessment systems. So the project format acts as a powerful control mechanism in academia. What is more, external control is not necessarily needed at all because time discipline is internalized as self-discipline. External schedules becomes one's own schedules and one controls one's own activity in order to keep the deadlines and provide value for money. Compression of time refers to speeding up of the tempo and pace of work. The project format involves constant competition for funding and visibility. To have success in this competition, it is important to have an outstanding research record and a long and impressive publication list. This creates a strong pressure for academics to achieve more and better outcomes in a smaller amount of time. Likewise, the project schedules themselves tend to be tight, for the funding bodies are not eager to pay for anything extra. As a result, experiences of time pressure and haste in work become common. Lastly, colonization of time means that project time easily subordinates other time frames. Commodified, controlled, and compressed project time leads to working long hours, often at the expense of one's health, family obligation, and other important commitments in life. Furthermore, the logic of project rationality easily may take over how time is experienced and valued. In this sense, colonization of time means that one begins to calculate the pros and cons of temporal investments and evaluate which investments are the most profitable and therefore the most desirable. Temporal investments outside of this kind of rationality are easily seen as what Adam calls shadow times, times that have less value because they cannot be converted into money. Viewed from the angle of these four C's, project time glorifies new values, such as economic rationality, instrumental orientation, efficiency, effectiveness, accountability, short-term, flexibility, and speed. When this kind of project time becomes a standard temporal framework for academic research, there tend to emerge conflicts and tensions. What then happens when the project format is put into use? And now next, I will discuss only some of the implications that project time has on academic life. To begin with, I want to emphasize individual agency. Thus far, individuals have remained rather hidden in my talk, but this does not mean that I would see structures dictating what individuals are doing, thinking, and feeling. Academics are not mere objects or victims of projectification, but active agents who navigate within project format and negotiate its temporal terms and conditions from their own interests and perspectives. Carolina Guzman Valenzuela and Ron Barnett call this kind of time by the term bargaining time. It means that academics reflect and assess how big temporal investments they are ready and willing to make in different time markets. They borrow time, they steal time, exchange time, save time from project time to promote their own interests. such as writing extra articles or working on their dissertations along project work. So academics can be competent partners in bargaining and try to get as good project terms as possible. And for some academics, this is very successful, and they can see constant project competition appealing, providing a sense of dynamism and speed. And this is easily so with the winners of the funding game. Furthermore, projects themselves are strikingly different. Although the format is the same, individual projects differ in terms of how much money is available, where the money comes from, and what kind of money it is. There are crucial disciplinary differences in this. Some fields operate at several research markets, both public and private, while some other fields have a substantially more restricted access to funding sources. The opposite disciplinary groups tend to be, not surprisingly, technological fields and humanities. For instance, I have done some work in Finland with my colleagues investigating disciplinary differences in academic capitalism, and it turned out that technological fields attracted funding from a wide variety of sources, from public funders such as research councils, EU, ministries, municipalities, but also significantly from private business and industry worldwide. At the other end of the continuum of humanities, it's were basically dependent on funding from research council and some foundation, that is academic funding for basic research. What is more, it's not only a question of amount and quantity of money, but also the quality of money. There is good money and not so good money, depending on how much temporal autonomy it offers and to what extent it resonates with one's research interests. In this way, in the same way as all time is not equal, also all money is not equal. Irrespective of equal quantity, there are qualitative differences. So it's very crucial in which kind of project you are working in. So this kind of disciplinary differences and differences in bargaining power among academics promote stratification and polarization of academic life. This, I think, is one of the consequences. In case of exceptionally abundant long-term funding from highly valued sources, academics reach a real elite position with luxury funding and temporal autonomy and freedom. They bring in money and prestige, which tend to be the most valued capital nowadays. All institutions, all fields think they are important because it's believed that they can be converted into better ratings in rankings and performance assessments. In this kind of elite position, it's possible to buy oneself out of teaching and administrative duties, if people want to do that, and also to have bargaining power to negotiate work conditions very favorable. In an extreme case, these kind of elite academics can become almost untouchable from the local university. They may also be involved in many policy in defining the rules of the game in policy settings and making these programs for research councils. Well, at the other extreme is the growing mass of project researchers. Projectification of science requires and is dependent on the workforce, cheap labor of flexible project workers who can be employed on short-term contracts and who are ready to move from one project to another, with or without continuity in content. This work involves constant circular repetition as they go through the same project cycle again and again. This Circularity is also characteristic of career building in short-term academic employment. It's difficult to have linear career advancement. Rather, in many cases, careers tend to move horizontally from one project to another. So it can be said that short-term projects create short-term workers who compose a sort of academic proletariat with insecure, uncertain work and career conditions. So it matters a lot what kind of project you start as an early career academic, what kind of opportunities it offers you. So I think the project format, in a way, partly promotes stratification and polarization of academic life at all levels, between disciplines, individuals, groups, and institutions. Science has always been very hierarchical, and the Matthew effect is a well-known phenomenon in science, but it seems that the current increasingly competitive context sharpens the divide between winners and losers, between have and have-not groups within academia. In this way, the project format, closely interrelated with academic capitalism, strengthen and intensify power relations in academia. They also contribute to increasing quantification and metrification of academic life. The amount of funding and the amount of person years offers exact numbers which can be utilized easily as a mark of quality and success in academic research. This is also something I personally come across quite often in my daily university life. In official meetings and unofficial corridor discussions, I just want to tell you one anecdote of my former professor of social psychology. He has been retired already many years ago, but he had a long and very high-profile academic career in Finland. He was one of the most influential, eminent social scientists in our country. Some years ago, he attended a conference and a wine party afterwards at our university, and he became quite confused and distressed. He came to me and said, "Oh, everybody is talking about how many projects they have and how much money they have. Nobody talks about the content, what they are investigating, what new ideas they have, or what results they have found." And he was quite confused. Well, there's a clear nostalgic tone in this memory, and some romantic also. But I do think that it captures some of the changes that have taken place in the common sense, taken for granted way to make sense of what counts in academia, what is valued and appreciated. Well, then what about academics' experiences more generally? How does the domination of project time reshape, remold academics' experiences? How does it feel like? In the last part of my presentation, I will answer this question by analyzing 3 temporal conflicts. In this, I will rely on empirical work that I have been doing recently with Finnish academics, Finnish social scientists. So the empirical grounding is only social sciences and Finland, so it's quite narrow, restricted. But I hope it has some wider resonance, and that these empirical openings, small openings, would give a sort of human touch to the temporal tensions and conflicts, what it is to work and live at the accelerated academy. So, short-term funding versus long-term research, fast time versus slow time, work time versus non-work time. Perhaps the most obvious temporal dilemma concerns the tension between short-term funding and long-term research. It is a widely said opinion among academics that research needs long-term concentration. Project funding, however, is temporary, fixed term, strongly dependent on changing needs and expectations of funding bodies. So this makes research vulnerable and risky. It's not possible to know whether or not there will be continuity for the ongoing project. And this is experienced a big problem for the quality of research. The short-term and tightly scheduled time frame enforces selecting such topics and methods that are feasible in a given time frame. This in turn may result in playing safely and drawing on conformist mainstream, which leads to what is often called superficial work. And this is what Ruth told about us yesterday about epistemic risk involved in this kind of work. And I have a quote from a professor of social policy, and he makes a distinction between superficial work and deep, ambitious, real research. When the schedules are tight and teams big, the research easily becomes superficial. You just collect data and do some superficial analysis. But this way of working does not satisfy me. I would like to do research which has historical depth, for instance, research which is ambitious. You cannot do it quickly because you need to think, reflect, rewrite your ideas several times. And this was a very common type of account. The conflict between short-term funding and long-term research creates also problems at the personal level. The future becomes uncertain, insecure, especially for the early career academics. Their employment is repeatedly threatened, and therefore they need to apply constantly for new funding. This insecurity is linked with waste time problem. Writing research application takes a lot of time and energy, but is experienced as wasted time, since most application will always be unsuccessful because of the heavy competition. And this dilemma often is said to decrease motivation and meaningfulness in work. This is a quote from a junior sociology researcher. You need to write application quite madly all the time, when a lot of my time, and sometimes clearly the major part of my time, go into writing application. The meaningfulness of work gradually disappears, especially as you know that mostly in it is wasted time, since we won't get the funding because the competition is so hard. Well, the second commonly said temporal conflict concerns fast time and slow time. There are, of course, several forces that accelerate the rhythm of work, such as technological acceleration, new managerial control and audit techniques, and various institutional reforms and mergers taking place in higher education institutions. Along with these drivers, also the project format is seen to speed up research activities. At the top of everything else, project research requires a lot of new kind of duties, such as networking, negotiating with potential partners, funders, end users, and all sort of new project management tasks. These new demands increases the overall time pressure, and many academics regret that keeping the project mill going takes almost of their time. And I have a quote from a sociology professor who has been very active and also successful in attracting project funding from national and international sources. Although being successful in these terms, his experiences are tinted with nostalgia and longing for what he calls laziness. Academic work is much more fragmented and fast-paced than it was when I started. But science would require laziness. Getting new ideas requires laziness or quasi-laziness and idleness. At the moment, I have no opportunity whatsoever for this. A special case which is often mentioned is reading books in particular. It seems that time for reading has become real luxury time. There's a paradox. At the same time, as academics produce more and more publications, there is less and less time to read them. So to whom are we writing? Who reads what we produce? Again, this is not only a question of time use, but it concerns the basics of academic identity, because reading is seen as one of the core features in being and working as an academic. When this activity is at risk, it decreases a sense of meaning in work and creates emotional distress. And here I have a quote from a sociology professor. It's not the same professor as the previous one. I didn't dare to look at books. Although I enjoy reading books, I didn't even want to look at them because I knew that I would not have time to read them. I felt really anxious. Well, finally, I want to mention a temporal conflict between work time and non-work time. This refers to colonization of time. There's body time, which sets limits to how much you can work. Academics in our interviews tell about experiences of burnout, severe baggage, mental breakdown, other illnesses that have forced them to slow down. Therefore, it's felt that it's important to protect oneself against too long and intensive working. In this way, it seems that internalized time discipline must be supplemented by the sort of internalized therapist or well-being controller, so that you must always be at all time controlling yourself so that you are not passing the limit. Not okay, I try not. And you have to monitor on your own use of time. Try to prevent excessive working. But the situation is complex because slowing down easily creates feelings of guilty and self-accusations, like in the following quote. In fact, I should be on holiday, but I just cannot go on holiday. Somehow I feel it would be a wasted time. I feel I should accomplish more. I know I should slow down. I cannot manage this all, but then again, I feel guilty for not achieving enough. I have been diagnosed with burnout twice. I really don't learn. In addition to body time, work time tends to get into conflict with caring time, either caring of children, one's parents, partners, other significant persons, or commitments one has. So work time easily takes over all non-work times. Therefore, academics need to struggle in order to find and keep a balance. Sometimes successfully, sometimes not. And some academics even ponder their work time in the light of existential time and awareness of the finitude of lifetime. And I have a last quote. It's from a sociology professor. If you are inclined to feel guilt, you always feel that you have done too little. I neglect students. I don't do administration enough. I don't see my partner enough, especially just the two of us. I don't spend enough time with my children. I don't sleep enough. The time I have, the time of my life, it goes so quickly. So to conclude, I have tried to develop the argument that project format that has become so standard, self-evident way to conduct academic research. It's not only a technical or neutral organizational tool, but it reshapes daily practices, ideas, values, and identities in research work. It creates temporal conflicts and tensions which have often unwanted, unintended implications for the conference theme by intensifying and strengthening the grip of power, acceleration, and metrics in academic life. So, thank you.
Thank you very much for this wonderful talk. We have about 10 minutes for discussion. I see a first hand raised there in the back. Yeah.
Thank you for a wonderful talk, a rich presentation. It was so rich that I found myself wanting you to do more with your own ideas. That is to say, I believe there's a political agenda that can be drawn out of your analysis, a political agenda for the academy. You were doing something like a sociology or a phenomenology of time. I found myself remembering Heidegger's initial quote of Being in Time, when he notes that time is the horizon for any possible understanding of being whatsoever. We have a certain understanding of time in the academy today, which was pushed upon us in a neoliberal way. And we need to articulate an alternative set of categories as you have begun to. The only criticism I would offer, or maybe as a provocation, is that this contrasting notion of process time, I think you could do a lot more with it and point out that we understand, for instance, that democracy is a messy business, but much of the virtue of democratic deliberation is in the process itself, rather than the results. If you want efficiency, go to the Nazis or someone. And so if we articulate, and I'm stopping now, right? If we articulate this notion of process time as a clear academic alternative, okay, and avoid the languages of the language of one of your quotes, where this is lazy or quasi-lazy. We understand what this person meant, but that certainly isn't the diction we want to use if we want to argue that there's certain kind of virtue that comes out of a slower kind or more recursive kind of thing.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I think, yes, it's, of course, it's very risky to talk about laziness or something in these days because it's easily understood wrongly. So, yes. Yeah.
There's a question in the back.
Simon Smith from the Social Academy of Sciences. You've given us a very depressing picture in a way of the projectification of academic lifestyle. I wondered if you could take a few moments to sort of broaden your account of project time, because the idea of projectification has been used in lots of non-academic settings as well. I'm thinking of Ortancian Fellows' idea of the city of projects as a form. I'm thinking of Tony Giddens' idea of life as a reflexive project. I'm thinking of innovation studies where the idea of the project is perhaps something more liberating because it's often seen as a place where you carve out to create a space that is not subject to the rigid discipline of organizational scheduling. It's often a space for inter-organizational collaboration and experimentation even. When artists talk of projects, I sense they sometimes refer to something restrictive, but quite often it's quite something more liberating. They talk about a personal project that they might have as a secret dream for something I might do in the future. How does your idea of that, and your research on academic projects relate to all these other versions of project time?
Well, I do think there's something in this talk, our views that it's us saying that we are living in the projectification of whole society. So it's our way of understanding what we are doing, what we are. It's a specific. It might be something to do with this kind of era we are living in, this late modern world. So it somehow crosses different spheres of activities. So it's not typical to academia at all. But then in this academic context, I have somehow linked project time very much with academic capitalism and this kind of funding mechanism that we are using. So certainly it's different when we think about, I have a project, I want to be a dancer, or I want to be a famous singer in the world, or something like that. But I think project is, well, it's perhaps one of those terms that gets, it has some sort of theoretical meaning, but then people begin to use it in their own ways, so it becomes a common way to make sense of one's life. It's a project. Like many other concepts we have, they are first academic or scientific concepts, and then they filter down to the use of everybody in society. So I think project has been used in many kind of ways, and I have a specific way here.
Yeah, well, I just have a kind of a maybe hypothetical question. When you were talking about these different kind of conflicting temporalities, I was just wondering, and I know I'm very much aware that your kind of argument is grounded in social sciences, but I'm at the same time, I'm kind of curious, and I don't know if there is an answer for that unless we have kind of empirical ethnographic evidence for that, whether if we look into natural sciences, for instance, there is a kind of another kind of temporality of the object of inquiry that enters into the research conduct. I mean, processes in nature, for instance, chemical reactions and so on and so forth, they kind of, I think they would complexify the conflicting kind of binary kind of items that you were talking about or they would extend them into kind of a different kind of level. Maybe, well, yeah, I don't think that there is an answer to that, but I was just like to remind, or possibly to myself, or to you, that it's not only about kind of a social time that we are actually dealing with in a kind of phenomenological way even, but also there are kind of temporalities of the objects in nature that must be taken into account once we are trying to investigate temporality of academia.
Yes, but there are also temporalities of social objects. If you ask, looking for social sciences are investigating, for instance, some, let's say, merger in university. It's a temporal process, and it has an effect how you can investigate it. So, but yes, I think I haven't touched at all this object side, like it's often done in science studies, that you take into account. These objects are like actors in an network. And so, yes, I think these kind of disciplinary differences are important, and certainly they are worth investigating empirically.
Just give you an example of that, Philip, which is actually beam time. So a physicist, your esteem is measured to some extent if you're working on the Hadron Collider and so on, how much beam time you can buy. That's a very good example. And 8 minutes of beam time apparently is fantastic. So, but that's, I think you're onto something, actually.
Do we have some more questions? We still have 4 minutes left. Is that right?
Yes, thank you very much. I also thought it was an extremely rich presentation. I'd like to follow up on Philip's suggestion that points to the epistemic effects. I think there's much to say for the dichotomy approach, the versus thing you have with short-term funding versus long-term research, etc., fast time versus slow time. But I immediately thought about how the two are hybridizing in a sense as well. So I was thinking about a professor that I spoke with that is very much using the opportunity of a grant proposal to then work the material she produces into particles. So there's this funding proposal time that is not lost, but it's merged into output, which probably affects both the things, both categories, the proposal as an actor and the article as an actor. And I was also wondering about the same kind of dynamics probably going on with fast time versus slow time. would be a nice follow-up, I guess, to the dichotomies you point out.
Yes, I do agree that these are like hybrid. This project time, process time, and all these elements or dichotomies that I showed you, they are just like ideal type constructions. So in reality, of course, they are overlapping and they are in a very also innovative way combined by actors and researchers. But yes, I do think that this diversity, there are some, well, let's say this stratification thing, so that in some projects there are much more space for these kind of creative combinations, and others are very fixed, very tight. So the space for autonomy is much more restricted. So there is very strong variation within the format.
Well, I just want to follow up on what Sarah was saying. I think that working with the dichotomy, I think that the hybridization is interesting to look at in terms of how it is used strategically. Because I think that it is very often used by powerful academics in leadership positions to communicate certain notions of what it means to be in science to early career researchers with very different very particular agendas in mind. And then the early career researchers are faced with the fact that, it's not necessarily true, they have to work around. So, looking into the ways in which, it's used strategically. It's not just the fact that researchers learn to work around it and manage both, process and project time, but that it's used strategically to achieve certain things that are imbued with power as well.
Just on that point, I have two separate points. I'm a physicist, by the way, so I've been involved in entailing in the past. But with regard to the early career researchers, yes, there is indeed a strategic element of it, I guess, in terms, but an awful lot of that pressure is coming from the researchers themselves. They know that if they're going to succeed, they have to work. The competition is exceptionally high, and they have to work extremely hard. To a certain extent, the researchers set the bar themselves. I would argue that it's not purely institutional pressure, but they know that they are competing in an incredibly competitive field, and they drive themselves. That's the first point. The second point is, and I'm playing devil's advocate here, and I'm going to approach this from a rather utilitarian perspective. We're taxpayer funded, we're publicly funded. Therefore, we have to demonstrate at some level value for money. Therefore, there has to be some element of assessing of productivity at some level. What do you think that estimate of productivity should be if it's not going to be the outputs given a certain amount of time that we've spent on the project? Or if it's not going to be outputs from the project in total?
I'm thinking about your first question. I just forgot it. It was about
early career researchers and how they set, how it's not always an institutional pressure.
Yeah.
It can be an internal pressure.
Yeah, it is, yes. And I think it's not only for early career researchers, but also senior researchers, because science, in essence, is very competitive, irrespective of this current format. So it's always the research merits that count, and there's a prestige. It's not money. It was, at least until now, money. It was not power. It was prestige that was the most valued capital in science system. So there is, at least in let's say, these hard fields in which it's very important to be the first to discover or have a publication on some issue. The first gets all the glory and all the prestige. So there is an inherent fast tempo element in science systems, I would say, for all academics, but this is a different story. And the output, productivity, yes, I think it might be also a question that is a bit confused and changing. Nowadays, the productivity, let's say in social sciences, humanities, it's publications. But for instance, I have been investigating optoelectronics and semiconductor technology in technological fields, and it's much more products. They are producing patents, they are producing, yes, yes, so it's diverse what the products are. Now, yeah.